cost-effective strategies for increasing patient compliance, increased attention on the role packaging plays in clinical results, aligning packaging strategies with desired patient outcomes. What should pharmaceutical manufacturers consider when developing the packaging for their products, and what best practices could they implement in the short term to produce long-term results? Join us to find out. In the Know starts now. Hello and welcome to In the Know, your source for insight and analysis on the issues that matter to our dynamic healthcare market. I'm your host, Gina Clark. Today we investigate pharmaceutical packaging, a crucial aspect of product commercialization that's often underappreciated or overlooked altogether. We'll talk about how packaging can influence everything from the initial doses taken by patients to the patient's ability to remain compliant with medications as prescribed. We'll also dive into how success is measured in this area and what best practices have come out of a strategic and measurable approach to product packaging. Here with us today are Mike Eaddy, Vice President with Xcenda, and Justin Schroeder, Senior Director with Anderson Packaging. Thanks for being with us today, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Gina.
Before we get into the impact that pharmaceutical packaging can have on patient compliance, can you give me a baseline of how large an issue noncompliance is in the U.S.?
Absolutely. We've known that noncompliance has been a big issue in the United States for quite some time. In fact, the World Health Organization states that 50% of patients who are taking chronic medications are non-adherent to their medication. That's a staggering number. There's an article that just recently came out this October and by Dr. Govey in the Journal of Medical Economics. The first sentence in Dr. Govey's article stated that noncompliance with medication is the single most factor that's causing us not to meet the outcomes that we would like to achieve in the United States. That's profound. Xcenda actually partnered with the large manufacturer to look at the relationship between adherence and outcomes. We looked across 15 different disease states, included up to 120 articles. 90% of those articles demonstrated that as you increase adherence, the likelihood of various utilizations, such as hospitalizations, ER visits, actually went down. 85% of those articles showed that as you increase adherence, you had a reduction in those clinical outcomes. For instance, in hypertension, you have a reduction in blood pressure, reduction in stroke, and reduction in heart attacks. So when you start to think about the clinical impact, it's very, very profound. We also talked about from an economic perspective. Economically, what we found is 65% of the studies demonstrated that as you become more adherent, you actually have a reduction in total cost, not just the medical aspect, but when you get an increase in pharmacy and a decrease in medical, the total cost is actually reduced. And that's very important because we generally think about adherence being impactful on the patient in terms of those outcomes, but we should also consider what it means to the payer. From the payer perspective, they're paying for a prescription and that patient isn't using it. So that's a wasted cost. Then they turn around and have to pay for those clinical outcomes that occur at some point in the future. So it's a double whammy to the payers, not to mention the potential impact that there is to pharma. What we know is that the average drug loses about 36% of their sales due to non-adherence. So when you start to look at all the stakeholders involved, particularly the patient, the payer, and pharma, we know that non-adherence is a huge issue in the United States.
Pharmaceutical manufacturers are addressing these issues through a number of programs. For example, phone-based clinical programs can produce positive results in boosting therapy adherence. To what extent are manufacturers looking to packaging as a solution to complement these efforts?
Gina, I think there's kind of a mindset shift in terms of what the role of packaging is for pharmaceuticals. It's not so much a delivery mechanism now as simply getting the pills to the patient. It's actually a medium to be able to communicate things, whether it's patient education, information about the product itself, how it's supposed to be administered, side effect profiles, and also it can be used as a tool to facilitate that doctor-patient relationship as well, creating a dialogue there to help supplement that.
Yeah, I have to agree with Justin. We've seen manufacturers become much more sophisticated in what they're doing to address adherence. We now know that there are a lot of factors that impact patient adherence. And historically, if you start to look at models that talk about patient adherence, you have the intentional non-adherence in terms of, I'm not going to take my medication because it costs too much, or I don't like certain side effects, so I'm not going to take my medication. Or, you know what, I just don't feel like I'm sick. You know, I don't feel this particular disease, so maybe I don't need that medication. And so historically, manufacturers have done a good job of addressing those particular aspects of adherence through copay assistance, medication therapy management programs, and also other types of adherence-based programs with nursing to talk about side effects. One of the things that have been overlooked over time has been that unintentional aspect of adherence in terms of, you know, I understand that I need to take this medication, but I occasionally forget. I need something to help me, to remind me to take it. And that's where the compliance packaging comes to play. And so now what you're seeing that with manufacturers, we have a set of tools that's geared to improve adherence and patient outcomes. And that's one of the best things with this compliance packaging.
Absolutely. It's really an integrated approach to address those issues.
How has the mindset and approach to compliance packaging changed over the years, on the manufacturer's side, as well as within organizations like Anderson Packaging and Xcenda? Can you talk a little bit about how the sophistication or level of innovation may have changed over the years?
Certainly. I think for a long time in the industry there was an intuition that compliance prompting packaging could drive increased adherence, but there really wasn't a whole lot of data out there to support it. There were some proprietary studies done, but that information wasn't shared amongst companies. Within the last 12 to 18 months, there's been a fair amount of data produced that actually demonstrates the role of calendarized packaging and how that can drive patient adherence.
Yeah, absolutely. What we've seen at Xcenda as well with the mindset change. Before it was, you know, let's just get the packaging. We think that it works. Now there's an increased shift to showing that it actually matters in the real world setting. And that's very important because as you start to think about their primary stakeholders, the patients, the providers, and the payers, if you can show the value of a compliance packaging to the providers, those are the ones that's going to prescribe it. Of course, the patient's going to get the benefit of the improved adherence. And then the payers, they're the ones who will have to pay for it. So what we're seeing now is a greater shift to not only suggesting that the compliance packaging works, but actually providing real world evidence that it matters in the marketplace. And that's what we're starting to see as well.
Could you walk us through how the development and rollout process ideally flows when working with a manufacturer? For example, what do you do to account for the goals of the manufacturer and the needs of the patient?
You need to take a very integrated approach to developing compliance prompting packaging. And you have to look at the various stakeholders within the health portfolio. I think traditionally packaging had been kind of like the last hurdle to getting a drug into market as they approach the late phase 3 area, getting close to the NDA filing. Now you're seeing a lot more information being pulled from the actual clinical studies themselves, seeing some of those patient behaviors evidenced much earlier, and those things can be leveraged to design a more optimal package and incorporating a lot of the elements that Mike spoke about earlier.
What real-world examples can you share about successful projects, and what do you believe made these projects successful?
Well, we just finished up what I consider to be a great real-world example. I'm actually partnering with Anderson Packaging here. But once the packaging was completed, it's not just so much rolling it out. It's making sure that all of the stakeholders involved understands the impact that this is going to have in the marketplace. And for the manufacturer, it was getting all of their internal departments together. It's the marketing, it's the health economic, it's their trade departments. And what we did is we partnered not only across our companies, but also with one of their customers to help their customer understand what the impact would be. And so once that packaging was rolled out, we used their own customers' data to evaluate the impact of the compliance packaging. That customer was extremely happy to see the improvement in adherence. And it was just a very good collaboration across manufacturers, us as consulting, Anderson Packaging, and also that particular customer.
Absolutely, and you can see even within that package, a lot of those elements that we touched on earlier were integrated in a very cost-effective approach. So not only do you have the calendarization of the medicine, fairly simple and straightforward, but you also get a lot of the adherence tools in terms of tips for patients, how they can promote better health, how they're most optimally supposed to take the product itself. as well as some of those enrollment tools to help supplement that relationship with the manufacturer.
With many of pharmaceutical products, there are several elements that contribute to patient compliance rates, whether that's the cost of the product, or side effects, or proper administration. How are you able to identify the effect that packaging has and how it impacts patient compliance?
Yeah, that's one of the things that Xcenda specializes in. When we design a study, particularly around adherence, we know that there are other factors out there that may influence adherence, the age of the patient, the gender, what type of health benefits that patient has. So those are the things that we need to make sure that we account for. If you're rolling out a compliance packaging and it's going to the entire population, one thing that you can do is more of a traditional pre-post type setting, because one of the things we want to make sure is, again, those factors remain constant. In those cases, when you're rolling it out to the entire population, those patients can serve as their own controls. A patient is on product A, the patient remains on product A, but now is under a compliance packaging system. So now we're able to measure pre-post the implementation of the compliance packaging, what that effect is. It's a very simple approach to doing it, but it is also an approach that lends itself to some attack. There could be a timing effect. Patients may become less or more compliant over time. Ideally, what we like to do is have a population of patients where the compliance packaging is only within that population, and then we select a different population that's taking the same product but is not having the compliance packaging. Then what we're looking to find is patients who, those same type of variables, patient in the Northeast maybe, certain region, certain age, certain gender, we're going to find that same type of patient who is outside of that repackaged product setting, same region, same age, and same gender, and we're going to match them. And then by minimizing all of those factors, what's left is the effect of the compliance packaging. So that's one of the benefits we bring in terms of measuring the impact that the compliance packaging may have. Let us help you design a study, figure out the right data sources so we can highlight what the impact of the compliance package is in the marketplace.
I would echo what Mike said in terms of being able to measure and identify what's being successful in that packaging program, and then creating the optimal mix ongoing. You can gauge as you go through the process and refine it.
In what ways do you work with pharmaceutical manufacturers to create a realistic and accurate expectation of what successful compliance packaging will produce?
From our perspective, the one thing that we try to enforce in all of our analysis of looking at the real-world impact of the compliance packaging, we've seen an effect. However, that effect may be different depending on the population that the compliance package is employed. I'll give an example. We looked at a lot of research across adherence, the relationship between adherence and outcomes, and you can implement one intervention and one disease and that same intervention another and see different effect. An example of that, if you take myocardial infarction patients who have heart attacks that start a new medication. If a patient's on a $5 medication versus a patient who's on a $105 medication, the level of adherence appears to be about the same. You take that same type of study design in hypertension, and you see a drastic difference in the level of adherence. So there are factors about the disease that may cause the magnitude of difference that you would expect to be different, and we help you in that regard. So one of the things that we definitely caution is not to necessarily take one study, one effect, and assume that's exactly what you're going to get in another study. Let us help you either predict that or measure that, because there is an effect, but it does change from the population that you're evaluating.
And to Mike's point, I think the elements of the packaging program that you choose, your strategy, really need to be analyzed based on the disease state and the unique characteristics of that market.
So what external factors, like healthcare reform or direct-to-consumer advertising, might influence a product packaging strategy and its implementation?
Yeah. When you start to look at all of the external factors such as direct-to-consumer advertising, healthcare reform, what we think is going to happen and what we're actually seeing is a change in the demographics. So for instance, with DTC, you now have patients who would not have necessarily gone to the doctor. They're going to the doctor saying, you know what, I want this particular medication. That's opening up a whole new demographic characteristics for the manufacturers. Also with healthcare reform, with the purpose of that being to expand medical access at a more affordable price, the demographics will change. And so now what manufacturers need to do is understand the change of those demographics as the population gets older. Some of those intentional adherence issues in terms of I'm not going to take my medication because of this may go away because they understand the importance of it. But some of those unintentional, the forgetfulness comes into play. So if manufacturers felt historically that certain compliance packaging strategy may not have been appropriate for them, it's probably time to take a look at that again because the demographics are changing with a lot of the external factors. And then one other external factor we need to think about from oncology side is a lot of the oral oncologies are going oral. And that opens up a whole new aspect of making sure those patients are adherent. In the earlier studies that we've looked at, we felt that patients would be more adherent to their oral oncolytics. It's a much more serious disease. We're seeing the same level of adherence with the oral oncolytics that we're seeing with some of the chronic diseases. So there's a lot of improvement that we can make, and those factors are going to give us a lot of opportunities to make those improvements.
I think packaging really is the most direct to consumer advertisement or medium. It really passes directly from the manufacturer to the patient, and that creates a lot of opportunities for them to speak to the patient and foster a relationship. Whereas traditionally, there was kind of a the pharmaceutical company spoke to the doctor spoke to the patient, and really now it's collective, and it gives a lot of opportunities.
So where do you see the future of compliance packaging heading, whether it's the application of technologies like RFID or integration with other consumer technologies like smartphones?
Well, I think we're seeing more of an integrated society, and certainly in healthcare that's applicable. There's technologies out there that are readily available that can actually monitor patient compliance. So as the person takes their medication, it records that information. That information can be taken back to a doctor or a caregiver or a healthcare provider and kind of integrate that approach. There's also technologies out there that will readily, the package can speak to other things, can speak to blood pressure monitors, can speak to scales, other types of things. And so when you start to look at the effect of healthcare, integrated healthcare, and the pay-for-performance model in terms of ensuring that there's better outcomes out there, you can start to demonstrate that through electronic packaging.
Yeah, I have to agree with Justin. If you start to look at the change and the evolution of just the American society, the number of smartphones that are out there, the number of iPads, mobile devices, it's tremendous and it's growing. We're not going back. And if you start to look at the number of patients or that access medical information through the web, when you start to put all those factors together, there's a tremendous opportunity to influence the outcomes of patients, adherence, what they understand through these media. And I think that's the new direction. What's going to be that next best app to help patients have improvement in outcomes? So that's what we're looking to embark upon.
Justin and Mike, thanks for contributing your thoughts to this and bringing to light a subject that's been under the radar for far too long.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Gina.
And thank you for joining us. We'll be back soon with another all-new webisode. Until then, if it's on your mind, it's in the know.